Who's Michelle?
When I walk into my class, I get the feeling
She's
that
in
females must be
'06. She's Chelsea's roommate right now? No, thank you. I'm gonna go to the roommate mixer first and see if there's like people.
Something is not right.
Why is ISP on board? It doesn't. That doesn't fit.
I'm a bit too into this game.
Oh boy.
Jessica, what'd you get for the horizontal action for the number one?
What was number one?
It was either 1/2 or 1.
Wait, what's it
Well,
called?
I don't think there were coefficients, were there? Or what? If
No, there were.
Then they were both 2. Because I know for one of them they were both 2.
That's what I thought, because I thought 1/2
Yeah.
at first, and I was like, but if you expanded it, it would be 2.
Yeah, no, that's what would happen. Because she said like think you don't have to actually expand it, but like think about it as if it were expanded. So the leading coefficient would be 2 on both sides. So it'd be like 2x squared over 2x squared.
Because I got to the end of the test, and I was like, I'm still not sure about that. And then I was like,
That seems fishy.
and I was like, you know what, I think she threw in that just to trick us. So I was like, I'm just going to put down 1. If not, my grade can't get any lower. So
Right.
I actually think my grades are the worst.
Me too.
I'm
I'm like,
like-
well, I failed this when really like I got like mid B at worst.
Like,
Yeah.
teachers here are kind of weird about grades though. Because like, when my teacher said I bombed the problem set, it was a B-.
What teacher would say that?
And I was like, he was like, why'd you bomb the last thing? And I was like, it was a B.
That's so disrespectful, and I hate it.
And I was like, I don't think that's bombing
I
it
got to have a
down.
40-minute crime session instead of a 20-minute crime session. Everything. He gave me a high five, I was like, I feel so good. Wait, because you know there's no direct
Class I know.
235.
What?
235.
That's 50%. That's like a coin toss. You don't believe me, I know. Tetris. Dude, I am so I cannot put that game in question. And so we had a bunch of antique corners and stuff. And so they were all like dead. Like 8 of them were like these things. A lot of them pictures. So much.
Alright, let me know you're here. Ayush? Josh? Sierra? Jacqueline?
Here.
Yes, October? Yes. Sweetha? Thomas? Here. Catherine? Eden?
Here.
Diane? Tommy? Jessica?
Here.
Lucian? Here. Soho?
Here.
Alexander? Here. Eric?
Here.
Colin? Here. Sybil? Fanmay? Here. Amanda? Here. Actually, it doesn't matter. I have your exams, which I'm going to give you a few minutes to look at. I need them back. You don't need them.
I think I
So
failed.
when I call, you're going to get it. Are you?
Girl probably bombed it.
Josh? Sierra? Jacqueline? Eden? October? Amy? Sweetha? Thomas? Catherine? Eden? Diane? Jessica? Lucian? Soho? Here. Alexander? Derek? Here.
Alright, fair enough.
Colin? Sybil, Tanmay, Amanda,
I combined the essays.
and Eunice.
Because I'm a fool.
So here's how they're scored. Sorry, I didn't do a lot of writing. I wanted to get through as quickly as possible. But what I'm looking for on the essays, I'll bring it back in a second. The essays, if you did like one on debates, I should have seen the compromise against convention, and I should have seen federalism and anti-federalism in some fashion. Like that was the minimum that I was expecting to see. If you did the one on the revolution, that one is less straightforward. There are actually a countless number of ways of getting at it. I would have expected to see something about the Articles of Confederation, probably about finance. You might have included something about the army and the militias and that kind of thing. And there are probably any number of other possibilities in there. But I needed to see, a number of examples that did that. When Skinner and I originally came up with those questions, the debates one is really geared towards my students, the expectations that basically all people be writing that. And the one about the revolution, it was expected all of Skinner students would write about that. But invariably what happened is I ended up with some students writing about the revolution even though I didn't necessarily emphasize it. He was complaining to me, the sheer number of students who were writing about the debates, which he didn't understand. Why would they all be writing about it when I talked about the revolution? I don't know, but we gave you the option, so that's how it came out. But that's what I was looking for on the essay. If you have any questions, by all means come and see me. The objective part is 20 points. The First Amendment, for example, is actually is a 5-point question. Each one of them is 1 point. And then the amendment of the Constitution is actually the same. It's pretty common for students to maybe miss a couple points on the amendment one. I was a little bit disappointed. The students who did really well, they made all the amendment first right, but ended up missing something else somewhere. Always looking for the students who get everything right there. So it's a challenging test, but it was possible to get an A, missing a couple points here and there. So I will let you look this over for another minute or so, and then I will take them back.
It's done, it's done.
Yep.
I don't even know when the next essay is due. Apparently,
I know that it's going to be 5 to 7 pages long. That's what it came out of.
I want to do it.
For the second and third paragraph things, what were the answers for?
The second and third what?
On the amendment section?
Yeah. I got the third one right. The third was the third amendment. I didn't get the second one right.
Second I put the fourth amendment.
Me too.
Did either of you get the second one right?
What? Is that not? Wait, did you get the fifth?
No, why didn't you get the answer? Why did I feel it? I don't know.
That's great.
There was one that I saw him working on and looking at it. I was like, oh, you were how can you do this? Also, when I saw the test, I thought it was going to be oh, no certain seizures. That's the goal, or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it was the actual same words in there.
Yeah. No, people told me that it was gonna be a lot harder than you think. So I studied for an hour just memorizing everything, reciting them over and over again.
I'm so confused about what the sentence was because that sounded a lot like.
Yeah.
I guess it could have been the sixth one, which is injury or whatever. No, that's not what that is.
I'm going to ask you to pull out your books.
I made origami hearts during the assembly because I was bored and
These two
hated it.
tables, you're going to go to page 346. Begins on page 346. You have Henry Clay. Okay, he's speaking on 346 through the top of 349. Okay. These two tables, I'm going to give you John C. Calhoun. He's on 349 through 351. And then these two tables, I'm going to give you Daniel Webster. He begins on page 351 and goes through 354. Thank you.
On what page?
Maybe the last two sentences.
3 what?
Yeah, on Monday.
Wait, what?
No, I was going to tell you tomorrow, but as long as you ask.
351 bottom.
Huh? The quiz on Monday will cover all the stuff we've done this week. But I was going to tell you tomorrow. I already have the quiz made. I was going to tell you tomorrow. But on Monday.
What have we done today?
What do you
So
do?
thanks for asking.
Daniel Webster. What's his name?
It's funny you should say that. My original plan was to give it to you tomorrow, and I was going to tell you today, which is why the quiz is all done. Josh, everyone's going to hate you.
Obviously she does. I bet it's not. I imagine.
Wait, is it 351 or 359?
351, and then
It's not
it's like
the way
the
it
last
ended.
two sentences.
Oh, I didn't see it.
It just sounds normal.
I'm gonna review that as soon as we start our discussion. Okay, so a review. I always do that. The Missouri Compromise from 1820 had said they were going to have this line, the Mason-Dixon line, south of it, which would be slaves going forward, and the north of it would be free. And they tried to keep this balance in the Senate by bringing free slave state and free state. What happens following that is this war where, Mexico made a mistake of not building a wall to keep the Americans out. They kept shooting in Texas. Eventually, there's this conflict. Texas declares independence. The Americans occupy Mexico, and they figure out what to do with the territory. Now, if they stuck with the earlier compromise, that means all of this is going to be safe. And nobody is happy with that. So David Wilmot in the House introduces a resolution that says slavery can stay where it is, but all of the new territory is going to be freed. It doesn't get through the Senate, and there it dies. 2 years later, then, that's 1848. They're still working on this. And Henry Clay, who's considered a great compromiser, introduces his what's called the Compromise of 1850. Now, there's another element to it, which I'm going to get to. He's the first one to speak here. You might remember he runs for president in 1844. He loses to Polk. And he's looking for a way forward that will be just that, a compromise. Not everyone gets what they want, so everyone is unhappy with it, but in either case, it's at least something everyone can live with. What does he say in his defense of his legislation? Yes?
He thinks that the Union can dissolve eventually, so the United States will move
Okay, what else does he say?
A war.
Okay, so it's 1850. Everyone's anticipating that a war is going to result and that the sectional divisions are coming. He's trying to head it off, though.
I gotta like that, like he's saying that like if people try to succeed and like dissolve the union, then it's just gonna end up like a war, so we shouldn't do that. And he says like he doesn't want slavery to exist. Or he says he doesn't want slavery like to make slavery where slavery doesn't exist, but like the main thing is that we need to have some sort of compromise so that it doesn't end up with war, because like any sort of dissolving of the union will into like a really happen.
Yeah, what he's giving here is a lot of speculation. He's like, look, if this compromise doesn't pass, if what I'm giving you, and I will give you a breakdown of it in a couple subsequent slides. Okay, I'll give you the full thing. He says, if you don't do what I've proposed here, we're going to end up in conflict. We're going to end up breaking apart, and there's going to be a war, and it's going to be terrible. He's saying this 10 years before that war actually happens. He says, so look, the compromise is our way forward. Then we have John Calhoun. The letter that what you actually have here is a letter from him. He's actually on his deathbed. This is one of the last things he actually writes before he dies. And he has it delivered by another member of Congress for him. So he's kind of responding to what's going on in the Senate, and he has somebody read it for him. What does he say? Calhoun, incidentally, is a Southerner with a Southern view of things. No, he's a Southerner, but he's desperate to keep the Union together. He doesn't want to see it broken apart.
He also has the responsibility of saving the union because the North.
Now he does something that a lot of people, Abraham Lincoln, for example, will push back on this idea. The South likes to always put the burden on the North. Well, if it wasn't for you Northerners, there wouldn't be an issue. And the North's position is, please, come on. Calhoun is doing that here, but while he's doing that, he's also saying, but my commitment is to keeping the union together, so therefore I'm supporting this compromise. I think it's perfectly reasonable. Anything else? And what about our last guy, Daniel Webster from Massachusetts?
So he basically says that he's very opposed to the Mason-Dixon line and says that there cannot be a line drawn to separate the states because it's like morally wrong because of social domestic relations and like natural causes that keep the states together.
Okay. And Jessica, you had your hand up too.
He also says that if they try to break apart, there's no such thing as like peaceful secession, so there's definitely going to be disagreements which will lead to a war.
Now, Webster's in a tough spot because he's from Massachusetts, and there are a lot of anti-slavery people, actually quite radical abolitionists in this part of the country. He's trying to run interference. He's doing his part as a representative, and he says, look, I know better, this is what we need to do to prevent things from getting worse. I also want to keep the union, so here again, we have three guys, all from different parts of the country, all trying to make a case for why they should support this compromise. Webster is thoroughly attacked after his vote on this for taking what they saw as a kind of soft pedaling and actually going for the compromise. There were a bunch of people who do not like the fact that he looks like he's being too easy on slavery, even though he's anti-slavery himself. So in this sense, Calhoun has a point. He's like, wow, the Northerners could be quite radical, can't they? Here's what it does. I'll come back to that. So Clay, the great compromiser, introduces the resolutions which are going to do. So rather than just saying outright, okay, this all becomes slave territory following the Missouri Compromise of 30 years before, California is going to become a free state. It had actually declared independence during the war with Mexico, kind of following Texas, and for a brief moment, California was independent, which is why if you look at the California flag today, it says California Republic, right? At its founding, it was. They decide they're going to establish territories in Utah and New Mexico. Utah includes Nevada and part of Wyoming. Actually, it's also part of Colorado. And New Mexico would be, again, part of Nevada, Arizona, and what is New Mexico today, right? The other thing they're going to do is settle the border with Texas. So all of this whole section up here, all of that comes out of the 1850 compromise. Here's the most contentious part of this, okay? This is the part, all of that is easy enough. You're like, well, that's not controversial, is it? What was controversial is, one, it establishes this notion of popular sovereignty. So rather than saying everything to the south is going to be slave and free, it says the people in those territories, when they settle them, they will decide whether or not they're going to be free or slave. This is going to have an unintended consequence that actually creates a civil war before the civil war actually is officially underway. That's something we'll see tomorrow. So popular sovereignty is the idea that people in a territory can vote on whether or not they can decide whether or not they're going to be a free or slave state once they're admitted. The other thing it does is there had already been a fugitive slave law, and there's even a section of the Constitution which has it kind of built in there. So the Constitution gives Congress the right to have a fugitive slave law, and then the Congress creates a fugitive slave law, and in the case of the Compromise in 1850, it extends the fugitive slave law into the territories. And what that law said was, anyone who encounters an escaped slave must return that slave to its owner or be involved in returning that slave to its owner, or you are breaking federal law. But what this does is make the entire Underground Railroad illegal under federal law. And if you don't know this, one of the northernmost centers of the Underground Railroad is actually right where we are. They went through Aurora, up through St. Charles, which was the center of abolitionism in northern Illinois, and the Fox River was this escape route. And for many slaves, that meant eventually going either to Chicago or finding a way into Canada. That was where they're trying to get. And this revision of the Fugitive Slave Act basically says, oh, all of you people who have been helping out the slaves on the Underground Railroad, all of you are now committing a federal crime for which you will all be prosecuted. Here's the unintended consequence of this part of the compromise. Remember I told you that the anti-slavery position was always the more popular position. Abolitionists were always a minority. This revision is going to create, overnight, an incredible boost in membership of abolitionist organizations across the North. So where before abolitionist organizations were kind of fringe organizations, they were very loud, but they didn't have a lot of membership. With this law, they suddenly have all kinds of members, and everyone has decided overnight that they are now abolitionists and not just anti-slavery. Good job, Henry. You pissed off everyone. So, yeah.
Quotes page.
Well, no, yeah, because under the Constitution, you can't be prosecuted for something after the fact. So that doesn't change. But if you do it once this law is adopted, if you're still doing it, now it's illegal.
Is that like our people to stop?
No, nobody's about to stop doing it what they're doing. Instead, they're just more angry than they were before, and they have far more membership than they did before. In now opposing what's going on. And so where before you had a country that was kind of on edge over this whole slavery issue, it's polarizing further and further. And that polarization is geographic. You're either from a slave society or you're from the North, and therefore it's a North versus South. Remember when, so the other thing about the Wilmot Proviso, the parties were in both parts of the country. You had Whigs in the South, Whigs in the North, Democrats in the North, Democrats in the South. But the Wilmot Proviso, what it showed was that there were regional sentiments over this issue. And so you had everyone from the North voting for the Proviso, and everyone from the South voting against the Proviso. So there is one more effect that this law has, which is going to be incredibly important. And it's along the lines I was just explaining, which is that all of those people who jump into who suddenly become abolitionists, the Compromise of 1850 leads to the creation of the Republican Party. Because it decides that the Whigs, which had been a party of the two regions, and some of them were for slavery and some of them against, the Republican Party is steadfastly against slavery. Period. Now, you're going to have abolitionists in there, and you're going to have anti-slavery people in there. So they're obviously not all of the same mindset. But the one thing that's clear is that unlike the Whigs, which caused regions, the Republicans are only a northern party. You will not find Republicans in the South. You will now, but you wouldn't at the time. So they end up having all of these people responding to the Compromise of 1850 with these mass public meetings and these protests, and they decide they need a new party, and they form the Republicans. The interesting thing about the names, remember the Democratic Republicans of Jefferson, they kind of fade, and then the Democrats rename themselves after Jefferson's party. The Republicans actually take their name from the other half of the Democratic Republicans. Right, so our two parties today are actually both named after the Democratic Republicans. The result of this is the Whig Party disappears. Abraham Lincoln, before he was a Republican, he was a Whig. In fact, he was elected in the state legislature in Illinois on the Whig Party. He was a leader of the Illinois Whig Party, and he was an activist in the Illinois Whig Party. And with the formation of the Republican Party, Lincoln will jump into the Republican Party. The other thing, because of this, because of the Whigs die, the Northern Whigs are then all becoming Republicans, and the Southern Whigs have nowhere to go. So they're going to jump into the Democrats. And what we're going to see by 1860 is the result here of this kind of people moving into sectional parties, where once the parties had crossed over sections, north and south, now you're either in the Northern Party or the Southern Party. The Democrats now will be the party that's completely divided, because it will have the old Whigs who are now who are Southern Democrats, and the Southern Democrats will have the former Whigs and those who were full-time Democrats, and they don't see eye to eye. A good analogy would be that the Democrats of the 1850s look a lot like the Republicans of 2017. They kind of have this little civil war going on over the direction of the party. But regional. It's entirely like geographic. The fight today isn't like that. There's another important thing to keep in mind. Let me back up here. This is 1860. The South has this perception that, as you will see, is completely delusional. Remember all of the immigrants? Where are they going? Not to the South. Not the Great White North, just the North. So, of course this North is going to have a much larger population. In terms of production of commodities, the North producing far more. I'll come back to this momentarily. Factories. It's not even close. And, there you go. And railroads, again, if we go, I showed you the maps before, the railroads are concentrated in the north. It makes sense. They have the industrial base. They have much more commerce going on. If I didn't mention it before, there was already talk of building a transcontinental railroad. The South is desperate to have that built through the South. There's no reason to build it in the South. Actually, there's no reason to build it at all. But the South really wants it. When it finally gets built, it's because the South has seceded, and Lincoln's like, oh, now it's a good opportunity to build that transcontinental railroad since we don't have to deal with the Southerners holding up. And so, of course, it goes across the country, and it's the North. But again, there's one other aspect to this that's important. How far is it between the tracks?
About the length of the width of the train.
I can always count on you, Josh. Have any of you been to Durango, Colorado? If you ever have a chance, Durango, Colorado is a beautiful little town. It used to be more beautiful, and then there was that accident a couple of years ago where they spilled all of the toxic chemicals into the Animas River. But anyway, it's a beautiful little mountain town. What's really cool about it is it's in a valley, so it can't actually grow any more than it's at. So it's like, it is what it is. Anyway, the one thing you'll find there is the Silverton Railroad. It's a narrow gauge track. The tracks are about that far apart. And you can actually take the old train. It's the same train they used to use up to the mines in Silverton. The other reason you might be doing this is because you're going to ski. Awesome ski. Anyway, the Silverton train, it looks like something you might see at like a children's theme park. You're like, it is only a couple feet apart. What's that? 3 feet. There you go. It's too narrow now for the trains that you use, but there were other tracks that were much wider, sometimes 6 feet apart. The railroad companies themselves were building different gauges. And at some point, At some point, they realized that it's kind of inefficient to take a railroad here, have to unload the whole thing, and put it onto another train because you can't take the same train because it's already engaged, and then go over here and then have to unload the train again, put it onto another train in order to get another gauge that will then take you here, which is what was happening. Yes?
Well, why don't you build from the shore down across the border of the
What they because you had a bunch of different companies, right? What they finally ended up deciding to do was to standardize the gauge, which is now 4 feet, 4.5 inches. Okay? And the reason they chose that one is because the majority of the track, I think that had already been put down, fit that dimension. And then they were looking for a number where they all decide on this 4 feet, 4.5 inches. It's much more efficient because you don't have to switch everything between routes. You pay whoever owns that section of track, they're getting the cost for using that track. But you don't have to do all of that loading and unloading. Much more efficient system. The South doesn't have a lot of tracks. But the one thing that you can count on with the South is when it comes to standardization, they're like, nobody tells us what to do. Sorry, not interesting. Yes?
Are the 4 feet, 4.5 inches inside or outside the rail? So like 4 feet, 4.5 inches, like counting the rail?
I believe that is an inside. They already lack the railroad mileage. They also don't standardize anything, and it makes it really difficult to move material around during the war. The North doesn't have this problem. The North can get stuff moved around relatively quickly. Well, the South, what I'm saying is, I already showed you all of those percentages, right? The South is at a disadvantage in every category. They've made their things even worse for themselves by not getting on board with standardization of rail. The North doesn't actually have everything standardized by the time of the war, but they started it.
So they won.
Very funny. And the other thing is, I mentioned the agriculture. And you might say, well, yeah, but isn't the South all about agriculture? That percentage that was on that graph is food production. The Midwest was the center of the food production for the whole country. And the Midwest, as you probably know, does not go with the South during the Civil War, which means the South has no way to actually feed itself. That actually becomes the big, they're like, well, we have cotton, but you can't feed your troops cotton, can you?
Seriously, at the Dollar Tree, you get a buck pence, you walk in
I'm trying to figure out like how much cotton candy you have to buy to feed your troops.
They would have to buy at least 20 of that, which is only $22. Exactly.
And what kind of nutrition are you getting from your cotton?
A lot of sugar.
A lot of sugar. Yeah.
A lot of
So they have to fight all their battles first thing in the morning.
Really? Yeah.
When they're on the sugar high.
Before they crash.
Where they crash. I'm gonna back out just for a second. Stop.
It's been like that.
So what
It's
time?
2:31.
Oh, okay.
I just
so,
checked.
Let me very quickly then do this. Alexis de Tocqueville he was French. He sent on a diplomatic mission to the U.S. What they're interested in is, here's a country that's democratic, people govern themselves. What do they do for punishment? Like, what's the prison system like? So they dispatched this guy on this diplomatic mission. He's going to make these observations. What he ends up doing is writing a massive book called Democracy in America, which is quite famous. It's a very interesting book, and he ends up making a bunch of observations. So he does on the prison side of it. He says he found that a majority of Americans claim the right not only to make the laws, but to break them. But then he makes this other observation. If ever America undergoes great revolutions, they will be brought about by the presence of the black race on the soil of the United States. That is to say, they will owe their origin not to the equality, but the inequality of condition. He says that in the early 1820s, nearly 40 years before the war actually happens. And it takes this outsider
So he's psychic.
to actually make the observation that the inequality of condition is going to lead to a serious problem later on. The abolitionist movement isn't even underway when he's writing this. I don't think that people really care a whole lot about the Tocqueville ethics. We care more about him now, because looking back and we're like, wow, I think he nailed it. The one part of his comment here that he is incorrect about, he thought that because of his context as a Frenchman in the 1820s, he was thinking of the Haitian Revolution, in which Haiti, which is all of the slaves, revolt against the French during their revolution. So he's thinking Haitian Revolution. So he's thinking the slaves will revolt against the whites, and that will be the source of the Great Revolution in the United States. It makes sense given his context. What he couldn't have anticipated was that when the war takes place, it's not going to be the slaves revolting against the white population, but the whites themselves fighting over this issue. It's the only country that ends slavery and ends up in civil war, and depending on how you want to look at it, South Africa has a situation, but it doesn't play out quite in the same way. This is an incredible observation in the 1820s. So when I see you tomorrow, the first thing we're going to do is talk about the Republican Party platform, and we're going to talk about